Jim France nearly fielded a team in the NASCAR Cup Series at Sonoma Raceway. Rockingham Speedway is up for sale, and it sounds like NASCAR might be increasing horsepower to 750 by the end of this year. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other sports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Christopher Bell's 2025 DeWalt concrete scheme that we'll see this weekend at National Super Speedway. The scheme does look really good in my opinion. I do like the colors on it overall. I think Joe Gibbs Racing knocked this one out of the park. It does look really, really good. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ben Rowe's 2025 National Stampede scheme that we'll see this weekend at Nashville. I really like this truck. It's going to look really good out on the track tonight during the Truck Series race. The scheme looks pretty nice, like the colors of it overall. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is J.J. Yeley's 2025 Fanatic scheme that we'll see this weekend at National Super Speedway. I actually like this car quite a bit, and I think it's really exciting to see the Fanatics is stepping up to sponsor J.J. Yeley and NY Racing in a couple races this year. The car looks good. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack in Nashville. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brad Keselowski's 2025 Solomon Plumbing scheme that we'll see this weekend at National Super Speedway. This one's a little bit different. It kind of looks like a test car, to be honest. Kind of different than the normal schemes we see for Brad Keselowski. It does look alright, but it's definitely different. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Frankie Muniz' 2025 Buy America Veteran scheme that we'll see tonight at National Super Speedway. Truck actually looks solid in my opinion. I think the cars actually look decent. They do look pretty good. Cars work somewhat on this truck. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack in Nashville. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chandler Smith's 2025 Wheeler scheme that we'll see later tonight at Nashville. I gotta be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of this one. I think there's some decent colors on this, but it doesn't absolutely work perfectly. There's better ways they could have done things with this one. It's okay, but it's not that spectacular, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the national purse money for this weekend. So every time we have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity, and Truck Race, Bob Pockets puts out the purse money for the event. And according to Bob, for the Cup race, it's $11,055,250. For the Xfinity Series, it's $1,651,939. And for the Truck Series, it's $782,900. Cup Series, no shock, surprise to see that number up a little bit down from last week's Coke 600, but of course, Coke 600 is a crown jewel event. Xfinity's about the same as it's been the last couple years. It seems like it's been increased over the CW numbers. And then, of course, for trucks, they still are struggling when it comes to the purse money currently at the moment. But nonetheless, the Cup purse money is good for the weekend. But outside of that, Xfinity trucks could be better, but at least Xfinity is more decent compared to the Truck Series. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kirby Joseph. As it was reported and announced by Bob Pockers on Wednesday afternoon that Kirby Joseph will give the command for the NASCAR Cup Series race next weekend at Michigan. Kirby Joseph plays for the Detroit Lions. I believe he's one of the better players that currently plays on the Detroit Lions at this moment. And it makes a lot of sense considering we're going to be up in that area next week. Hopefully it's going to be a very exciting race. I think it will be a pretty good race in all honesty, but it's pretty cool that Kirby Joseph will get the chance and opportunity, and pretty cool that he'll be the guy that will be given the command for the NASCAR Cup race next week. I think it's really exciting and really good stuff overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about vehicle weight. As it was reported by Bob Pockers on Wednesday that NASCAR has modified the rulebook in regards to vehicle weight and it involves the driver. Usually they only test drivers once a year in regards to how much weight the driver has on themselves. However, starting this week, I believe at National Super Speedway, they are going to be testing drivers multiple times every single week. So every single year. So instead of just having it like once, they're probably going to do it like 4 or 5 times at least a year. This is to give them an indication, especially when it comes to vehicles going through post-race tech. They're going to be kind of do something very similar to Formula 1. Everyone kind of thinks about the tungsten blood plug stuff that's brought up by Cole Pern on Twitter not too long ago, and I think that this is something that's probably coming into play because of something like that being brought up. To me, I think it is certainly interesting. I think there's some interesting stuff. They can take a look at that from that as well, and I'm very intrigued to see if we'll see some new stuff come out and maybe find some new information about stuff like that going forward, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Red Bull. As it was announced yesterday that Red Bull will sponsor Shane Van Gisbergen this weekend at National Super Speedway. This is going to be the third of the 5 scheduled starts that Shane Van Gisbergen has had with the sponsorship, and the second week in a row that we are seeing the Red Bull sponsorships, considering they sponsored Connor Zilisch this past weekend at the CocaCola 600. I gotta say, the car, just like it did earlier this year at Vegas and a couple other races, it did look really, really good. We're going to see this car in a couple other races throughout the remainder of this season, and I think it's still really awesome that Red Bull is back in the sport. The car does look really, really awesome. It does look really, really good, and I think it's just, again, very exciting and very great to see that they're back in the sport, working in the sport in the way they are. I think it's really exciting, and again, I think it's pretty cool nonetheless to see that they're back in the sport and they're sponsoring, and I think it does look really good, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Indy 500 TV ratings once again. Now, we got a lot of ratings to talk about today on the channel, but first of all is around the top markets in regards to the Indy 500. According to Adam Stern, the top market, which is no shock and surprise, was Indianapolis winning 22.4. In second, you had Louisville with a 6.7. In third, you had Milwaukee with a 6.2. In fourth, you had Dayton with a 6.2. And then in fifth, you have my home city, St. Louis, with a 5.5. Indianapolis really was high this year because of the fact that a lot of people could not go out there. This is a basically big proof here that we need to stop doing the Indy 500 blackout. I think the Indy 500 blackout has been archaic for a very, very long time. And the sooner you can open that up, the better I think it is going to be for everybody involved in the sport. So I hope they do open that up because I think that's actually something that they could definitely do for sure. But nonetheless, I think it's interesting numbers for sure. And I do think that they probably should go ahead and get rid of something like this going forward. So I think it definitely be really better for the sport if they don't keep doing it in the not so distant future, and in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jimmie Johnson. As there was reported by Adam Stern on Wednesday afternoon that Jimmie Johnson is signed with WME to represent him in Legacy Motor Club in all areas of the sport, whether it comes to performance, whether it comes to sponsorships, and everything else that associates with Jimmie Johnson and Legacy Motor Club. WME is a Hollywood-based agency. I think a lot of people in the motorsports world and also in the entertainment world do associate with WME. This could be a really big deal going forward when it comes to sponsorships, and when it comes to especially for Legacy with the loss that they've got going on with Rick Ware Racing at this moment, it could be a really big deal on that front as well. So I think that this could have some major impacts going forward if you are a Jimmie Johnson fan on the future of Legacy Motor Club, because I do think there's some big stuff that's going to be coming very, very soon in regards to that with Legacy. Of course, like I've already mentioned, there's a lawsuit happening at this particular moment in time. I do think that there's some things that might be happening very soon for the sport in general. So I think having an agency coming in, we're seeing more of these agencies, we're seeing these new groups come in. I think it's certainly interesting, and I think having a new company like WME signed up with Jimmie could be a really big deal for the long term of Legacy Motor Club in the not so distant future. And in my honest opinion, I think it could have some really big impact going forward. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about average finishes in the NASCAR Cup Series. As it was reported by the NASCAR Insights account on Wednesday morning that they have released the top 10 average finishes in the NASCAR Cup Series currently at the moment. And we're going to talk about the top 5. In first, you have William Byron with the 8.86. In second, shockingly, you have Tyler Reddick with an 11th place average finish. In third, you have Kyle Larson with 11.88. It dropped quite a bit this past week after Kyle Larson crashed at the CocaCola 600. I think he had the number 1 before this week. Then, of course, Denny Hamlin has a 12.07, and you have Christopher Bell in 5th with a 12.3. You notice there's no Fords with really good average finishes so far this year. I believe that the top one is Chris Buescher, I'm pretty sure. I think he's got like a 13th or 14th place average finish. But William Byron does not surprise me or shock me, considering William Byron every single year. He does an excellent and really good job when it comes to this consistency. Now, William Byron does need to win more races, but I do like the consistency I'm seeing from William Byron at this time. Nonetheless, I think some of these numbers are certainly interesting. I think there's certainly some things to watch out for when it comes to stuff like this going forward into the future, in my honest opinion. I think it definitely could be some big impacts on some things going forward. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Michael Cannon. As it was announced on Wednesday afternoon that Michael Cannon has officially joined LGBCoin Racing starting this weekend at the Detroit Grand Prix and will be the race engineer for Rinus VeeKay's number 18 car going forward for the remainder of this season. This is a really big deal. Michael Cannon, we all know, is a fantastic race engineer, and I think that they really needed it over at LGBCoin Racing, considering the fact that they struggled to make the Indy 500 this year. Jacob Abel failed to qualify for this year's Indy 500, the only one that unfortunately ended up going home, and Rinus VeeKay just barely made the field in the Indy 500 this year. Bringing someone in like Michael Cannon absolutely makes a ton of sense. He is a fantastic race engineer. He has done a lot in the sport, especially for many years. He worked with Santino Ferrucci a couple years ago. And in general, I think he really is going to bring a lot to the table to really help LGBCoin Racing get a lot better. We saw Santino Ferrucci as a rookie in 2019 have some major spotlights, and I could see Rinus VeeKay contending on oval, especially before the end of the year, with how good his oval programs have generally been. So something like this is a really big deal, and I think it's nonetheless really exciting to see that Michael Cannon is coming in to work with the team. I think it's going to help the organization going forward in the future. Very excited to see that they will have Michael Cannon joining the LGBCoin Racing organization starting this weekend at the Detroit Grand Prix. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Maya Cider. As it was announced yesterday that Maya Cider will drive the number 91 for DGM Racing this weekend at National Super Speedway. This will be the third scheduled start for Maya Cider of 2025. He ran a couple races early in the year. I believe he drove at Martinsville and also drove at Homestead Miami Speedway earlier this year as well. Maya Cider, of course, does have one win in the NASCAR Xfinity Series back in 2022, driving the number 2 car, 21, I should say, back in 21, when driving the number 2 car for Richard Childress Racing. I think Maya Cider is honestly not that bad of a race car driver and not a bad choice to get behind the wheel. Plus, he's got sponsorship from Treetop, which is one of the big reasons why he's in that car this weekend in the first place. He's been obviously doing a lot of stuff with his father recently when it comes to the TV side of things for NBC. Also, I think he's been helping out with Amazon and some other of those companies as well. So I think nonetheless, this is still a very big deal for as a whole to bring in Maya Cider for the weekend. I think he's going to honestly do a very solid job. I think he's going to do good this weekend. I do think he's got a chance to get a top 20. I think these cars have had that speed a lot this year so far. They've shown top 20 speed, so I could definitely see Maya Cider having a really good run. We'll see if he can run really well this weekend, but again, I do think he's got a great chance and a pretty strong opportunity to potentially get a top 20 finish this weekend at Nashville. I think Maya's been good here. We'll see how he does this weekend at this racetrack. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Days of Thunder 2. As it was reported by Adam Stern last night, there's been a little bit of an update in regards to the potential plot of Days of Thunder 2. The guy did the direction for the Mission Impossible Day of Reckoning, which of course I believe is going to be the final one that's going to be released ever. Kind of talked a little bit about this in a video that was released yesterday. And they said that they know what the premise would be about. They would have the script done very quickly on Days of Thunder 2, and they would have it done very quickly. Days of Thunder 2, there's been a lot of talk and speculation about that. Of course, Days of Thunder 1 came out around the 1990 to 1991. So it's been about 35 years since Days of Thunder was released. And I think it's time to get a second one out, considering they released Top Gun Maverick a couple years ago, and I think Top Gun Maverick was really good. I'm very intrigued to see what the plot is going to be if Days of Thunder 2 does end up getting released. And I think that there definitely is a lot of intrigue and a lot of excitement around it. I mean, Jeff Gordon, of course, is at the Mission Impossible premiere, and I do think a lot of people want to see a new Days of Thunder. It was a really great and awesome film. You got to get people that are really big, and I think that if a Days of Thunder movie could come out, I really think it could take that sport to the next level, just like the F1 movie might be able to take it to the next level. So I'm very excited to see what's going to come out from this and see who they bring into the table going forward, but I think that this is still a big deal nonetheless, and I think it's pretty awesome to see that it sounds like Days of Thunder 2 is in the works right now. They're working on it currently at the moment. Very intrigued to see what comes out about that going forward in the not so distant future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about LGBCoin versus NASCAR. As it was reported by Bob Pockers on Wednesday that the judge in Florida ruled case to go to trial for LGBCoin claim for damages to its market value. The judge, however, has tossed a breach of contract out and also tossed the other part as well. Let's go back to a few years ago with LGBCoin. Of course, Brandon Brown had basically in the crowd when Brandon Brown had picked up his first and only career NASCAR Xfinity win. Of course, they were saying a certain thing I'm not going to say here. And then Kelly Sabat at the time, who was still working with NBC, she said, "Let's go, Brandon." And it caused a lot of controversy. Of course, he lost his sponsorship. He then picked up this LGBCoin. They were not approved from the sport. And they basically sued NASCAR for damages that were affected to it. Obviously, it's a little bit of a controversial situation and thing, and I think it's kind of wild that we're at this point where maybe going to be going to trial about this. I wonder if they will end up getting approved and maybe see Brandon Brown back in the sport, because since this time has happened, Brandon Brown has not been really involved. I cannot really put any blame on Brandon Brown for this situation, though, considering, in my opinion, I don't think Brandon Brown really deserves any of the crap that he got here. It really wasn't his fault what happened here. It was a bunch of stupid stuff from other people that were working on the NBC platform, that were working over there, and of course people not really basically keeping their drunk you-know-what and keeping quiet and not having to say this during a broadcast. So I personally think that for Brandon Brown, I feel bad for him in this situation because, again, Brandon Brown did not deserve what happened to him. I think he ultimately screwed in this case and situation. And I do think personally that I think that this whole thing was a little bit frustrating to see. I feel bad for him because, again, I really don't think he should be getting any flack for what happened here. And I think it's disappointing that it's reached this point. We're going to trial. I have to think he might have to represent in this case going forward. And I think in general, he wasn't really one to make a decision. His dad was one to make a decision in regards to sponsorship. So the person that really got screwed in this situation, the LGBCoin, was Brandon Brown, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Monaco GP TV ratings. As it was reported by Jeff Gluck from The Athletic a couple days ago, the ESPN and ABC got 2.3 million viewers for the 2025 Monaco Grand Prix. That is the most watched ever Monaco Grand Prix in U.S. history. It also is the third most watched Formula One race in U.S. history as well. Despite the fact that the race itself, in my opinion, was not very fun, it was the worst of the three races, which isn't shocking and surprising. Pretty much you knew after qualifying, even though you had the very interesting tire strategy going on, you pretty much knew at that particular moment and point who was likely going to be going to victory lane. But I think a big reason why the rating was up, because one, it was early in the morning, because number two, Formula One is still growing. But number three, I think a big reason for that is because of the fact that this is the last traditional Monaco Grand Prix. I think most motorsports fans are tuning in because they know that this is the final motorsports Christmas, because I believe Monaco is going to be moving either early in the season or later in the year next year. And you're not going to have the traditional motorsports Christmas. I believe the Canadian Grand Prix, which is actually going to be in North America this time around, will actually be where it is, which honestly, I think Canada, that would be certainly very interesting to have that part of the tradition. But nonetheless, I think the ratings for this weekend are solid for the Monaco Grand Prix, actually really, really good. They're very, very solid, and I think overall, I think a lot of fans should be very happy about that when it comes to the numbers for that event. In my honest opinion, I think that's a pretty solid number for the Monaco Grand Prix in 2025. I think the numbers are pretty good. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Andres Perez. As it was announced yesterday that Andres Perez will make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut in about a week or so from now at Mexico City, driving a number 91 car for DGM Racing. He will also have Telcel as a sponsor in this event. He is now the second Mexican driver to be confirmed for the NASCAR Xfinity Series event, as Daniel Suarez will drive the number 9 car for Junior Motorsports in Mexico City. Now, Andres Perez, of course, won the ARCA Championship in 2024. Despite the fact he did not win a single race, he got a lot of runner finishes and showed a lot of speed throughout the season. So far, of course, he's been full-time with Spire Motorsports in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, and I got to be real and honest, he has been extremely underwhelming. Yes, Spire Motorsports has definitely taken major steps backwards this year, and they don't have the pace and speed that they had in 2024, like Raja got a win, but I think that he's been struggling. I am very intrigued to see with him going over to DGM, a team that's been up and down in the past, but a team that has shown potential performance stuff. I would be very intrigued to see if Andres Perez can run very well in this event. I think he does have experience in racing in the Mexico Series, considering I believe he is a NASCAR Mexico champion as well. I am very intrigued to see if he can run very, very well with this team and program. I think he does have some prior road course experience too, which I think could help him. So we'll see what happens going forward, but I really hope Andres can do a good job. I think it's exciting to see that we are going to have a couple drivers from Mexico coming in for this event, and it sounds like, according to reports, we might see a few more guys from that general region coming in racing, which is a very, very big deal. So exciting stuff nonetheless, for sure, to see him get the chance and opportunity to drive the number 91. I hope he can do a really solid job, and I hope he can definitely run very, very well with this team and with this program this weekend, not this weekend, but a couple weekends from now at Mexico City. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about General Motors. As it has been reported by, I believe, the Wall Street Journal a couple days ago, that General Motors has abandoned a plan to pump $300 million into electric vehicle production up in New York. And it sounds like the focus is going to be toward VA going forward, according to what has been reported. Yes, there's still going to be a little bit of focus on toward the electrical side of things, but they are basically beginning to abandon and back out of a lot of different things. In fact, multiple representatives from General Motors are going to California to basically try to get rid of the ban that's been going on going forward and trying to basically remove the thing that is required for electric vehicles by 2035. The reason this is happening, by the way, is because I think a lot of people know that, one, the grid is not sustainable currently at the moment. When we look at electric vehicles, right, electric vehicles are not sustainable long term. So I do believe that there have to be some major changes made, and we need to go back toward the VA side of things. I can't think, one thing that General Motors and a lot of these car companies are starting to realize is you can't have all your eggs in one basket. You have to have multiple different baskets available for multiple things to happen. That's why I'm very intrigued to see if we are going to see a car from the General Motors side that is just a VA car altogether, because right now with NASCAR, there is no current car that is being produced at this time. With them backing out of stuff like this tells me that maybe down the road we could get a VA type car, which I think will be a really big deal if something like this could happen. So again, I'm very intrigued to see if we do see some changes going forward on this front, and I really hope we do get to see a car that is not electric, and we can see a car that is a traditional VA car that we have seen for many, many years. I hope it happens, and we'll see if it does happen, because I think it needs to happen for the sport, and I think it needs to happen for the car industry in general, not to just focus on one thing in the sport, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Charlotte Xfinity Series TV ratings from this past weekend. And honestly, they are very, very good. As was reported by the CW yesterday or Wednesday, they report that the CW earned 1.148 million viewers at Charlotte Motor Speedway. This is the first time since 2016 that the first 13 races have had over a million. Like I mentioned, the first time since 2016. Keep that in mind. That was 9 years ago. It has been nearly a decade since the first 13 races of an Xfinity season have been all over 1 million. It had 1.4 million, 1.148, or like 1.418, I should say, which is a really, really big and massive, massive deal for the NASCAR Xfinity Series, because the Xfinity Series, especially with having an exclusive home and not going to a cable service for that matter, I think that has been a really, really big win for the sport, and Xfinity especially. They have basically a group that's growing. You have a niche group of NASCAR fans that are tuning into Xfinity racing because, number one, the Xfinity Series, no offense to Cup, but most of the time the Xfinity Series is putting on a much better show and a much better product than the Cup Series is nowadays. And I think having a number like this really proves that at this particular moment in time. So I really like the number that we're seeing here. I think this is definitely a really big win as a whole. And I think for Xfinity, I think it's going to continue being wins because I think they're doing a lot of things they really need to do for the sport to generally grow. So I'm excited about this. I think the number is really good. I think they've got great numbers for the weekend. I think Xfinity will continue having over a million. I think this weekend, especially in Nashville, and being a night race, for example, on a Saturday night, I think the numbers could be really solid, and I think there's a good chance they could be really, really strong and really, really good. And I think it's really good numbers for this weekend's race at the Charlotte, and I think that will continue this weekend at Nashville as well. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Will Brown. Now, Will Brown, of course, will be making his first Cup Series start of 2025 and about a month from now at the Chicago Street Course. Well, it's been reported by, I believe, VA Sleuth or the Speed Cafe group over in Australia that Will Brown hopes that the run at Chicago leads to an oval start in the NASCAR Cup Series in the not-so-distant future. He says if it's a very successful run and does really well in the call racing entry, he hopes it can lead to an oval oval start going forward. I would love to see Will Brown make some oval starts, in all honesty. This is going to, of course, be the first Cup start he has had this year. It's unknown if this is a one-off entry for the season with the Kaulig Racing Group or if he's going to run more starts with the team in 2025. There's been a lot of people that also think that Will Brown down the road could transition to a full-time start run in NASCAR competition, which if something like that was happen, I think that'd be a very, very big deal. So I'm very interested to see if he can get like an oval race done and maybe get an opportunity to run an oval race at some point, because I think that Will Brown is a talented race car driver. He was really good at Sonoma last year for the electrical issues getting caught up in a wreck ended up happening. So I want to see what happens and see if he can run good, especially with Kaulig Racing, for example. Maybe we see him in a full-time Xfinity. Maybe he does what SVG does, kind of transitions and does a full season Xfinity. I'm looking at how Josh Williams is, no disrespect to Josh, but Josh Williams has really, really struggled this season. Maybe we see Brock Feeney and Will Brown come over, race in NASCAR full-time in the Xfinity Series. That is certainly a possibility and certainly something to watch out for as well. Nonetheless, I love to see Will Brown make an oval start. I think it'd be awesome, and I think there definitely is a chance for that to happen. We'll see. We do get to see Will Brown make the opportunity to race at Chicago and lead to maybe an oval start in the not-so-distant future. Very intrigued to see if something like that does happen, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Scott McLaughlin. Now, there was a lot of controversy surrounding Scott McLaughlin and Kyle Larson from the past week at the Indianapolis 500. There was, of course, a radio communication situation that happened. Scott McLaughlin, of course, crashed, and Kyle Larson apparently had a response to Scott McLaughlin and wasn't very happy and gave him a thumbs up. Now, a lot of people thought that Scott McLaughlin was being serious, and Scott McLaughlin basically said that he wasn't really being fully serious. He likes to poke fun at a lot of people in these situations as well, and he basically made the best driver in the world comment, and he wasn't really even being fully serious. Well, Scott McLaughlin did actually basically put out in a video that Bob Pockets and Nathan Brown from the Indy Star put out, and basically says that Kyle Larson actually apologized to him for what happened there, and he said it was an honest mistake, and I didn't mean for that to happen. Scott says that he knows that Kyle Larson did not mean that. In this case and situation, I think a lot of people took what happened with Kyle Larson. I think a lot of people really blew this thing way out of proportion. It's not just coming from a Kyle Larson fan, but this is coming from someone who has seen a lot of radio communications before. Do I think that putting the thumbs up in a sarcastic way is the nicest thing to do? No, absolutely not. I think they probably shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, I think a lot of people blew this whole thing out of proportion, especially if you go to the IndyCar Reddit, for example, or even go to the NASCAR Reddit or Twitter. Everyone got really upset with Kyle Larson over this, and I get that it was probably not the smartest thing to do, but there's been other drivers in motorsports over the years that have done stuff like this before, where they have gotten upset, where they've gotten mad at drivers for crashing. And I think a lot of people just were looking for a reason to hate on Kyle Larson, in all honesty, which I think the Larson hate this month was honestly ridiculous. There was a lot of people that were just hating on Larson just to hate on him, and I think Larson's earned some of that from some of his fans. I'll admit some of the Larson fans can be really bad from time to time, but at the same time, I think some of these fans have just were a little bit overkill and a little bit overboard on stuff like this. I don't think this needed to be as big of a story as it became, and I think it shows that Larson's also not a bad person because he basically called and said, I was wrong for that and I do apologize. That shows that Larson actually knows they probably should have backed off a little bit in that case. I mean, he's been in Mexico recently trying to get those DAP points, but I think it's good that Larson apologized to McLaughlin. And I do agree he didn't have to apologize to him, but I think for the sake of making people happy, I think he did so people weren't as mad at him about basically doing what he did, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As it was announced yesterday that Kyle Busch has officially picked up a new sponsor for the remainder of 2025. He has now picked up his fourth energy brand company over the years, as Anheuser-Busch Company's Form Energy will be working with Kyle Busch, and they will endorse Kyle Busch going forward, and he will endorse them as well with their energy drink company. This, of course, under the Anheuser-Busch brand. What I'm very intrigued about is not the Form Energy side of things, but the Anheuser-Busch branding. Of course, Anheuser-Busch has worked with RCR in the past. They sponsored Kevin Harvick back in the mid to late 2000s and also going into the early 2010s as well, when Kevin Harvick was driving the Budweiser car from around 2010 all the way, or 2011, I should say, all the way to the end of 2013. Then, of course, left at the end of 2013 to work with Kevin Harvick at Stewart-Haas Racing, starting around the 2014 season. I would definitely love to see Anheuser-Busch work with Kyle Busch. And I was thinking about this as well. Why not have a Dale Earnhardt Jr. number 8 throwback down the road? I mean, Dale Earnhardt Jr. has rights and control to the number 8 DEI trademark at this particular moment and point. So why not go ahead and get the Busch branding? To me, I think that'd be really, really awesome to see something like this. But I think it's a big deal for Kyle Busch to pick up another company. Obviously, this is the fourth energy drink company that we've seen work with Kyle Busch. We obviously did see him work with NOS Energy for many, many years. Then, of course, he worked with Monster for a very, very long time, which is why a lot of people thought maybe go to 2311 because of the Monster connection, which, of course, he's staying with RCR for next season. And then, of course, he picked up the Rowdy Energy brand, his own company, and now he's got Form Energy as a sponsor. I think this is still a really big deal, though, that Kyle Busch has picked up new sponsors and continues to pick up new sponsorships for the sport to grow overall. I think that you need sponsors to come in and really have people like Kyle Busch, for example, get some of those sponsorships. So I think this is still a big win for the sport, not a big win, but I think it's a big win for Kyle Busch, especially because we all talk about Kyle Busch when it comes to sponsorships, right? We talk about the fact he struggled to pick up those sponsors. But I think it's pretty exciting to see that Kyle Busch has picked up a new sponsor. I think it's a big deal, and I think it's really cool that they'll be working with Kyle Busch going forward. I think it's really exciting stuff that Kyle Busch has picked up a new sponsor starting this weekend at National Super Speedway, which is an energy drink company. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about AJ Allmendinger. As it was confirmed yesterday that AJ Allmendinger will return to Kaulig Racing in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2026, driving a number 16 car once again. We kind of talked about this a little bit on the channel earlier this week, but now it's been officially confirmed that it is happening. AJ Allmendinger, to my understanding, does have a long-term contract with Kaulig Racing through, I believe, the remainder of the decade at this point, but it's unknown if that is just for the Cup side of things or if that is basically with the Kaulig Racing enterprise in general. AJ Allmendinger, of course, has been with Kaulig Racing since around 2019 when he drove for them part-time, and then, of course, has now led to a full-time opportunity over the course of the last couple of years. And so far this year for AJ Allmendinger, he has done a very good job. My expectations coming in the year were actually very low for AJ, not because AJ Allmendinger is a bad driver or anything. No, AJ is a very good driver. I just wasn't sure where Kaulig Racing was going to be. But to their credit, this team has done a very, very good job when it comes to their pace and speed. They have shown a lot of improved performance this year. AJ's got a really great opportunity to make the playoffs this year. He jumped up from 24th or 25th up to 18th in the regular season standings after an impressive run in the Coast 600, scored a lot of stage points, and was up front through the majority of the event. In general, for AJ Allmendinger, I think that this is the best decision that this organization could have made for next season. Now, going into 2026, can this team continue to build upon this speed and continue to improve? I think a big reason why you've seen so much improvement from this organization is bringing in Ty Norris. Ty Norris is he really helped Trackhouse Racing go to that next level. They really started showing a lot of improved performance, and in 2022, both drivers went to victory lane, and Ross Chastain went to the championship 4. And since then, Ross has picked up 6 career NASCAR Cup Series victories. So I think for AJ coming back, this is a no-brainer move for the team. Now, you got to look at that second car, for example. Is it going to be Ty Dillon in the team? Is it going to be Daniel Suarez? That's unknown at this point because many people like myself to believe that Daniel Suarez is going to go over to Kaulig Racing next year. That's just my prediction. He might stay with Trackhouse, who knows? But I think if Suarez goes to the 10s, Daniel Suarez is making that 10 car a lot better than Ty Dillon is. I think Ty Dillon's ran decent in that car, but I don't think he set the world on fire. Nonetheless, I think it's a great opportunity for AJ. I think he's earned the right to stay in Cup. And I think for AJ, I really hope he can continue seeing the improved performance of the program. And I think the 16 team's done a good job. Glad to see he'll be back with the number 16 team and organization for the remainder of this year and also for 2026 as well on the NASCAR Cup side. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the RFK Racing and Chris Buescher appeal. Now, we covered the story on the channel a couple days ago, but it was announced that the appeals panel has amended the penalty for RFK Racing and Chris Buescher. Let's go back to a couple weeks ago. After Kansas Speedway, the number 17 car was sent, of course, the R&D Center. And they handed out not one, but 2 penalties from the R&D Center. The first one involved the front bumper cover being messed with, but they also got a penalty for the exhaust cover panel. The original penalty was 60 points. Scott Graves would be suspended for 2 races, a $75,000 fine, and the playoff penalty would also see him as well. Now, that, of course, has unfortunately changed a little bit, and they were able to win their appeal at least a little bit. So, And now the big change is how many points he has lost. So instead of losing 60 points and being around 23rd or 24th in the regular season standings, he's gone actually and gained 30 of those points back because they feel like that they actually did not violate the exhaust cover panel penalty. So therefore, it goes from 60 to 30 points they lost on the L1 side. The least amount you can use in an L1 penalty is basically 20 points from what I remember correctly. I think it's a range of 20 points to 60 points because they did violate one of those rules. It is a 30-point penalty. This moves him back from basically being 23rd in the points up to 16th in the regular season standings and 17th in the playoff standings, with Josh Berry being the driver below him, who did get that win at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. This is now a really big deal because for Chris Buescher, you pretty much were in a must-win situation. You're going to have to win a race because there's a lot of really difficult tracks coming up for him. Yes, he's a pretty good road course racer, but he also is someone that's been a little hit or miss at times at these road courses. But I think for this team, it is a no-brainer because this is a really big deal for the team. They are not planning to change anything. They actually released a statement saying they're very thankful that the appeal process went through the way they did. In general, this is not an end of season penalty for the team. This is actually a turnaround for the team, and I think it's still a big deal they're able to win their appeal right here. And I think for the team, this is a massive congratulations to this program. This is now the second time we've seen an appeal this year where a team has kind of technically won. You think about Chase Briscoe early in the year. They got penalized after, I believe it was Atlanta Motor Speedway. They had their car taken to the R&D center. They handed a big penalty. They appealed it, and they actually won their appeal altogether and got all 100 points back. And they went from having negative points to having positive points. And now they're back in the playoffs, and Chase Briscoe has shown a lot of really good speed throughout this year so far. So in general, this is a really, really big dub for the organization. Not a full dub like it was for Briscoe, but I think it's a pretty big dub, and I think it's big. They're able to win their appeal. We've seen some appeals happen where teams haven't won, but I think this is still a pretty big win for the organization, in my honest opinion. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Coca-Cola 600 TV ratings. There were a lot of people very intrigued with the Coke 600 TV ratings from this past weekend because this, of course, was the first race that was ever on Amazon Prime. Well, the numbers have come in, and honestly, they're really, really good. According to Adam Stern, for the NASCAR Cup, Coca-Cola 600 Prime scored 2.72 million viewers for the Coca-Cola 600. That is down about 300,000 viewers from last year's Coke 600, which had 3.01 million. But you have to remember that race is, of course, on national television on Fox. Yes, it was delayed, but of course, it was not much down compared to last year's Coca-Cola 600. But this is the big number right here. According to Adam Stern, Prime got 800,000 viewers in the 18 to 49 demographic. That is a major, major increase on the percentage of the demographic where they were still basically at about 30% of the viewership, which is an increase from prior years where it's been about 20 to 21%. You had almost a third of your audience that was in that 18 to 49 demographic, and the average age of the event went down from 62 years down to 56 years. This right here is very, very important. Yes, the number is a little bit down, but honestly, for the first streaming service race, it actually is a very, very solid number. I don't think anybody expected that the number was going to be as high as some other events. And I think that for the Coke 600, this is a start. And I do think it's going to improve. I think the numbers are going to increase. I saw some people saying it's not going to increase. But I think as people saw, one, a fantastic broadcast. But number two, they're offering free subscriptions. A lot of the older people are like, oh, this number is going to suck. No one's going to watch. Well, nearly more people watched this race than every cable race. In fact, I think it's been only the third or fourth most watched race of the year and the most watched non-Fox top race of the year so far. And almost 3 million people tune in to a streaming race. And I think in general, I think you're going to see these numbers continue to go up as the years go on. It happened for the NFL broadcast, for example, and those numbers were really, really huge. So I think this is a massive, massive win for the sport as a whole, that those numbers are actually up. I think for Amazon Prime, they continue building a really great broadcast. And already Fox, after one race, is trying to play damage control. You've got Michael Mulvihill, who's been against streaming altogether. He basically was trying to defend their coverage. And also Larry McReynolds is also talking about the commercials and all that stuff, which again, I don't think a lot of people are looking at the commercials, Larry, and I think they're looking at it too, but they're looking at the presentation of the broadcast. Your guys' presentation hasn't been great. Amazon's broadcast in 1 week blew out your coverage over the last 10 years. I'm just being real and honest here. I think this is still a pretty big number. And again, I think that number is going to continue to grow in the not-so-distant future. So I'm excited about this number. I think it's a great number, and I think it's really good to see the Coke 600 got pretty good ratings from this past weekend. Really exciting and really awesome, and pretty great stuff, too, overall. We see that number up for the Coke, well, down, but still pretty good numbers, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Alex Palou. Now, Alex Palou, of course, picked up his first ever Indianapolis 500 victory and picked up his fifth win in IndyCar over the course of the first 6 races, and now has a 100 or over 100 point lead over the second driver in the points, and that is Pato O'Ward. And Alex Palou was most recently on the Happy Harvick podcast, I believe it was on Wednesday or Thursday, or at least Tuesday, I should say, and they were basically discussing, do you have any interest in racing at other motorsports in the future? Alex Palou has rolled out, of course, going to Formula 1 in recent weeks, but it sounds like Alex Palou is actually expressed interest in racing in NASCAR. Now he says that he would probably get his butt kicked if he did race at an oval, but he says he would love to run a road course or a street course race in NASCAR in the not-so-distant future. I believe this is now the first time we've heard Alex Palou express interest in coming over in racing in NASCAR, and I would love to see Alex Palou come over and try it out. Alex Palou, in my opinion, is one of the top drivers in the world. The guy, of course, has won 3 IndyCar championships and is very likely going to win his 4th championship very, very soon. He, of course, also has been very good in IMSA competition, really good at the 24 Hours of Daytona, really good at Le Mans last year, and, of course, he's won in pretty much everything he's gotten behind the wheel of and has been very, very successful. And I think him coming over to NASCAR would be huge. Now, if he decided to run an oval race, he would have a lot more opportunities to race at. When it comes to the road courses, however, I think that becomes a little bit more difficult because when you look at the schedule, for instance, for Mexico, you've got Gateway happening that same day, and I get the day maybe they could fly out there, but the race is only going to be done for a couple hours after, and time zones are different in the Mexico area, so I don't think Mexico is going to be possible for Alex Palou, unfortunately. I think you have to look at other tracks. People will probably talk about Chicago weekend, but Mid-Ohio's going on during that time. And while I think Alex Palou is likely going to clinch championship by that point, I certainly think that he wants to focus on trying to win as many races in IndyCar as possible. The only road course race that he could probably do right now is the Charlotte Roval, because the IndyCar season ends basically at the end of August going into early September, and I think in the Roval is in the middle of October, so you could definitely do that, or late September I should say. You could probably have Alex Palou get the chance and opportunity to run maybe the Charlotte Roval, but that would be a very interesting race to make your debut. But I also think you got to look at Project 91 as a potential landing spot if Alex Palou is to do something like this. And again, I think there definitely is a great chance and possibly that we do see Alex Palou try to go ahead and do something like this going forward. Alex Palou, like I said, is one of the most successful motorsport drivers on the world currently at this moment. Alex Palou does know how to get behind the wheel of a race car and have a lot of success. So I really hope we do see this happen. I really hope we do get to see Alex Palou have the chance and opportunity to race in the sport. I know Chip Ganassi not ruled out the possibility either of coming back to NASCAR, so maybe, just maybe, we see the Chip Ganassi program come back to the sport. I think that'd be really cool if something like that was to happen. We'll see if it does, and we'll see if Alex Palou's interest does come into play, and see if he does down the road get the chance and opportunity to race in NASCAR in the not-so-distant future. I think it'd be great for the sport. We'll see if it does happen, and maybe it could happen for the future of the sport if we're Alex Palou to get to race in the sport. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about horsepower and increasing it. Now, over the course of the last week or so, there has been a lot of talk and conversation in the industry by industry representatives that it sounds like there is a lot of talk that there might be an increase of horsepower coming into the sport in the not-so-distant future, and it could happen before the end of this year. Earlier this week, Elton Sawyer, who's one of the higher-ups in the sport and a former driver in the NASCAR Busch and Cup Series, or the Xfinity Series, I should say, he basically came out and said that there is a lot of increased talk that this is going to happen. And Mike Ford, who is the communications director for NASCAR, he says that NASCAR could be adding up to around 750 horsepower, going up to 750 horsepower, I should say, before the end of this year, and could be testing at short tracks before the end of 2025. Now, he did not give specific specifics on what dates exactly and what tracks could end up doing it, but it sounds like they are in talks to have something like this happen. This is really one of the things that I have said for a while, but the one thing that we have not done at this moment is added horsepower to see if horsepower could work, because I think adding a little bit of horsepower could actually really make the racing at least a little bit better. We have tested out the tires, and I think bringing the old tires in that are softer have actually made the racing product at least a little bit better. Have they made it perfect? No, of course not, but I think it's made the racing product, at least on that front, a little bit better. But what's one area that I've complained about when it comes to it? The lack of horsepower. And I think this discussion should have happened a lot longer ago. It shouldn't have taken this long for this discussion to happen, but for a long time, NASCAR was like, no, we're not going to add horsepower to the next-gen car. Now, to emphasize this, and I know some people are asking, what about 900 horsepower? It sounds like NASCAR is not wanting at this moment to go to 900 horsepower. I think a lot of it has to do with the manufacturers, but I think they also know that they could get up to 900 with the hybrid component, but I also think they're looking at the hybrid situation over in IndyCar, and they might hurt the racing a little bit, because I don't think the hybrid has made the racing IndyCar better. I think it's actually hurt the product, at least on the road courses, definitely. Maybe it helps the NASCAR product, but I'm not sure if it really is going to. But I think horsepower being increased in the next-gen car needs to happen, at least for the short tracks. And I could see something like that happening at some point this year. So I think if you add horsepower to the next-gen car, I think going up 750, while it's not going to make a massive difference, it's going to make a subliminal difference where I think it will make the racing product at least a little bit better. I still think there's a lot you're going to have to do outside of just adding horsepower, though, to make this car a lot better, because I think there's so much that needs to be done to get the racing product in a much better direction. But it is a start, right? I think that we need to get rid of some of the stuff under the car. I think you got to look at maybe shortening up the tires a little bit. So I think one of the issues is that the cars are going the same speed pretty much, and they're all basically very close together. But close racing does not produce the greatest racing. I think a lot of it has to do with the spec stuff. And I'm not the biggest fan of spec racing in general, and I think that getting rid of the spec stuff and having variables would be one way to go. But again, adding horsepower to the next-gen car, I think at least adding a little bit could actually help the sport at least a little bit on the short tracks and even the road courses too, because if we're going to bring a short track package in general and bring in more horsepower, we need to basically find a way to basically bring it not just for the short tracks, but I think the road courses too, because I think the road courses could definitely be using some of the stuff. And maybe we do that on the intermediates as well. I think that certainly could be a possibility too. And having more variables for the drivers, because with the next-gen car, everybody's pretty much going the same with SMT. You got to have those variables to make the racing product a lot better. So to me, I really hope with these potential changes coming, we can see better racing. I think this is actually a really exciting deal that it sounds like horsepower might be coming in. Drivers and engine manufacturers like Chevrolet, Toyota, and Ford have all clamored for. And I think regardless if you want to hear Dodge and Honda come in, I think you got to add horsepower for the racing to be better. In my honest opinions, I think it will help the racing definitely a little bit for sure. And now we're going to head on to the first of two major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about Rockingham Speedway. As there was reported, I believe, by a company out called the Charlotte Observer and the North Carolina Observer, that it sounds like Rockingham Speedway is currently going up for sale at this moment. Dan Lulewin, who of course was the promoter and the owner of Rockingham Speedway, is expected to sell off Rockingham Speedway to a new buyer going forward. He says, "We have taken the right steps at the beginning to try to help promote the track and grow it. Now we're going to sell off the racetrack to someone who could really take Rockingham Speedway to the next level." Rockingham Speedway, of course, had a ton of success at their first return since 2013, when, of course, the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series returned for a couple years in 2012 and also in 2013. Casey Kane, of course, won that race in 2012, and Kyle Larson picked up his first Top Tour National Series win in the Truck Series in 2013. And then you think about Rockingham Speedway this year. Technically, we thought Jessica was the original winner of the event, but then, of course, it was Sammy Smith who picked up the win, who also got disqualified at Charlotte very recently as well. Now, going to the future, obviously, of course, they were supposed to be back for 2026, and it sounds like they're trying to be back on the schedule long term. And NASCAR wants to do something with the track going into the 2026 and also in 2027 seasons as well. Now, it sounds like it's unknown who the buyer is going to be, but it sounds like Greg Biffle is certainly interested in coming in and maybe buying the track and maybe having Cletus and Farrell come in and work with that group over there. It sounds like Greg Biffle is certainly interested. Biffle had decent success at Rockingham Speedway going back through all races, of course, watching him. Greg Biffle, honestly, was pretty solid at Rockingham, especially at Xfinity, and not in truck competition because they only went there a couple times. But I think Greg Biffle was really good in Xfinity competition, especially going back to like 2001, for example, and 2002. But going back to Rockingham, I think there really are a couple interesting parties that could come in and buy. Obviously, I think ISC and SMI would be the most logical options. It's because I know NASCAR really wants to have an event down there. And I think ISC coming in and buying it up, which of course is NASCAR nowadays, I think that would be very, very interesting. SMI buys it up. I'm really worried that the racing product may not be as great, but I think SMI also would probably do a decent job on the promotion side of things. I also think about Dale Jr. Dale Jr. is certainly interested in trying to bring things. He kind of helped North Wilkesboro get revived. And I think Jr. coming in and buying Rockingham would be a major, major deal because I think it would help maybe the Cup Series get back there. But I do have a little bit of theory. If ISC or SMI does buy it, if SMI especially buys a track, my theory is that we see this track get the All-Star Day. I don't think it's going to get a points-paying Cup Series day in 2026, as I think they want to build up and have a points-paying day in the future, but they want to build this racetrack up and have the Xfinity Series and Truck Series be the star of the show. But I do have a little bit of a theory that maybe they do bring the All-Star race to Rockingham Speedway. Here's why. There has been a lot of talk currently at the moment that North Wilkesboro is looking to have a points-paying day on the NASCAR Cup schedule next year. The fact that Fox was pushing so hard at this at North Wilkesboro 2 weeks ago and saying, do you want a points-paying date here? There is a lot of talk right now that North Wilkesboro could get a points day. In fact, they were supposed to actually get a points day in 2023 or 2024, so going last year. They're supposed to have it as the Easter day as a points-paying event. I think that you see North Wilkesboro get on the schedule. My other theory is that Bristol Motor Speedway, if something like this was to happen, they would lose their spring day as well. Look, I like Bristol Motor Speedway, don't get me wrong, but North Wilkesboro put on a much better product than Bristol. I know that's crazy to say in 2025, but it's true. The racing at North Wilkesboro, I thought, was a lot better for the Truck Series and the Cup Series. And if we do get a points day at North Wilkesboro, I actually do think that you basically go get the Xfinity Series, because Dale Jr. has said if we do get a points day here, I would love to see the Xfinity Series come to the track. I want to see Rockingham on the schedule. I want to see it on the front for the Cup Series going forward, and I think that this is a major deal because I think there's some potential major impacts that might come the way if something like this is to go down. So I really want to see Rockingham on the Cup schedule down the road. Again, I don't think it's going to be on the Cup schedule, at least as a points-paying date in 2026, but I do think that there's a chance that anything could happen at this point, and we really don't know exactly how things are going to go through in the future, but this is a really, really big deal. It's a big win for the sport in general that something like this may end up happening where Rockingham ends up on the schedule. I hope it does happen. I really hope Rockingham is a Cup Series race. It should be a Cup Series day in the future, but it sounds like that with the talk of maybe buying it up, we know they want to keep it on because they do have at least a couple more years in that contract. I think it'd be a big deal regardless of what happens. I really hope we do see Rockingham on the schedule in the future. It means, again, I want to see Rockingham on the schedule next year. It'd be really great for the sport, and I think it'd be a really big way for the sport to grow into the future if a track like Rockingham could be on the Cup schedule very soon. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see what happens for the future of a track like Rockingham very soon and in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Jim France. Now, we talked about this on the channel yesterday, but according to The Athletic and Jordan Bianchi and Jeff Gluck, it sounds like Jim France was looking to fund a NASCAR Cup Series ride / team for later this year. According to The Athletic, Jim France was near a deal to fund a car in the Cup race at Sonoma Raceway in about a month from now. According to the article, it sounds like they were going to partner up with either Spire Motorsports or Hendrick Motorsports for this event. The team was going to be under the Action Express banner, and Jack Aiken, who drives the number 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac into the IMSA Series, the IMSA GTP car, he was going to be tagged as the driver to drive this car. Now, why did this deal fall through? Well, according to the article, there are 2 or 3 really big reasons for this. Number one, there's a lot of people in the garage and in the NASCAR industry that were very much against something like this happening and not wanting something like this to happen because they felt like it was going to be a major conflict of interest. Number two, another reason why this deal ended up falling through was another major reason is because of what happened with Team Penske very recently. Roger Penske owns IndyCar. He also owns the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And he also owns a team in IndyCar currently at the moment right now. And what's happened? Team Penske got in a lot of controversy at this year's Indianapolis 500, and many people felt like that for the team to get into a much better position long term, they were going to have major changes in the sport. It sounds like they fired a lot of people recently. Kyle Moyer got fired, Ron Mazuski got fired, and the big one, Tim Cindric, he got fired from the team and organization to stop something like this from happening and going through into the future. And it sounds like an independent governing body is going to be coming in when it comes to officiating the sport. The other thing, and the other reason why this kind of fell through is because of the lawsuit going on at this moment right now. Remember, right now at this particular moment in point, you've got 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports that are suing NASCAR on antitrust claims. Lawyers in this case have basically told NASCAR to not do something like this because it could be really bad long term if something like this was to go through and a team was basically to try to do something like this where they fielded a car. I think about this whole situation. I kind of said this in my video yesterday. I do not want to see a NASCAR-owned team, a team owned by an owner of a sport, come in and race in the sport. Because again, like I've already mentioned multiple times, it's a major conflict of interest. We've already seen it in IndyCar. We talked about the IndyCar debacle. You've got a lot of people that are calling for Roger to sell the series. He could own Indianapolis, but to sell the series to an independent group and let people run it that know how to run IndyCar and not have Penske Entertainment running it in general. Get Penske completely out of the name. And I do agree with that completely 100%. I think it would not have been a great decision for the sport as a whole. Now, according to the article, it does sound like that there still could be a potential possibility before even the end of this year. It's not rumored for Spire Motorsports car that we talked about early in the season. There's been a lot of talk that there could be a for Spire Motorsports entry at some point. I know some have mentioned maybe Daniel Hemrick was going to be the driver at Daytona, according to what some have said on social media. And I do think that it would have been overall a really bad look for Jim France especially. And it seems like at least Jim France and NASCAR realize, yeah, this probably isn't the best idea. We probably shouldn't field a team in NASCAR when we're having issues when it comes to lawsuit right now and antitrust. If fielding a car probably would not be our best intentions. It would not be the best decision for the sport to survive long term. And again, that's very important. You don't want the conflict of interest in the sport. That would be really bad. You don't see this in soccer most of the time. You don't see this in Formula One. That'd be like Mohammed Ben Sulayem fielding a team in Formula One or Stefano Domenicali in Formula One fielding a team. Or like, I know people mention like Xfinity, but you don't see that in Xfinity where the top people and executives are running a team in Xfinity. Same with trucks. People say, well, what about Ben Kennedy when he had a team in the ARCA East and West Series? Well, Ben Kennedy was a driver. And people mention Kyle Larson and Hylam, and it's like, you can make an argument case for Kyle Larson, but I don't know if Larson has his own team in High Limit. If I'm wrong about that, correct me in the comments. But I don't know if Larson has his own team in the series. I can't remember if it's Paul Silva's team or if it's his team. If it's him, then yeah, that's not a great look for Larson either, by the way. But I think that if your team, if you own the series, you should not have a team competing in it. That's my personal take on that. But nonetheless, I think it's certainly interesting. It sounds like this still could be something to watch out for as a potential possibility down the road. And I don't want it to happen. I don't want to see NASCAR have their own team racing in the sport. It would be really bad. It would be a terrible look. And I really hope they decide to go ahead and go against this long term. I'm glad to see the teams at least had some brains to go ahead against something like this. And I really hope in the future that we don't see stuff like this happen where team owners are basically coming from people that are higher up in the sport. It would not be good, and it would generally be a really bad look if something like this was to happen going forward. In my honest opinion, I really hope that teams continue to deny this and not let stuff like this happen, in my opinion. So that is going to be today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about the fact that Jim France nearly had a NASCAR Cup Series team in the garage? Learn your thoughts in the comments below, and more thoughts about Rockingham Speedway being up for sale. Learn your thoughts in the comments below. Depending on what happens today, there might be more videos dropping. We're going to have the truck review later tonight, depending on the weather, of course. Then, of course, tomorrow we're going to have the Xfinity Series review, and we're going to have the Cup reactions qualifying for the Cracker Barrel 400. And then, of course, on Sunday, we're going to have the starting lineup video for the Cracker Barrel 400. We're going to have the review for the Cracker Barrel 400, and we should have some other content dropping on Monday as well. We got content coming on people like Haley Deegan, Shaman Gisberg, and Cards, Kirby Joseph, Bubba Walls, Ross Chastain, Cleese Farm, Matt Benedetto, Frankie Muniz, Connor Zillis, Jr. Motorsports, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Will Brown, Cam Waters, Brock Feeney, KSL Logan Paul, all the good stuff we'll be talking about the channel coming days and weeks. Same with Amazon Prime, Donald Trump, and all the good stuff. Same with Dodge, talking about all that on the channel in the coming days and weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.